Welcome to CEA's Google Hangout.
Welcome, good afternoon, good morning. My name is Lori H. Schwartz. I'm managing partner of StoryTech, and along with my partners at CEA, we are producing this Google Hangout today to give you that insider's perspective on what's happening at the Consumer Electronics Show. A little bit about StoryTech. We are a strategic consulting and packaging firm. We're dedicated to informed collaboration between our clients, storytellers, brands, technology companies, really resulting in profitable business and content ventures. And a part of our play at CES is to give tours, the StoryTech Impact Tours, and we base those tours on crafting trends that help all of our clients understand what's really happening on the show floor. And so today's Hangout is an opportunity to dive into those trends with some of our best partners and thought leaders in the business. And just to take a moment to thank our sponsors who are helping us with sponsor and put together our tours in this Google Hangout. First, I'd like to thank our platinum sponsor, Switch Supernap, who's helping to sponsor this Hangout and the tours. They are the highest rated co-location data center in the world, powering production in the cloud, managed services, distribution, and security for the media and entertainment industries. And for more information, visit supernap.com, and we're going to be hearing from Jason all about the Supernap and some great thought leadership about the cloud. And also, this Hangout is sponsored by Synopsys Media, the publisher of 5 free trade publications for the television, media, digital, and sports TV industries. They have a family of products including Synopsys, Synopsys Digital, Synopsys Sports, Daily e-publications, Weekly Synopsys Kids, and Synopsys Classified Advantage e-publications. They also have special e-reports, events, and summits, and a really strong database of classifieds. So visit synopsys.com, CYNOPSIS.com, to sign up for your free subscription today. Really a wonderful piece of editorial to keep you in the loop. I'd also like to take a moment to introduce my partner at StoryTech, Brian Sethurst, who's going to be jumping in with some insights as well throughout our presentation. Hi, Brian.
Hi, Lori.
And now to dig right into our first trend here for the StoryTech Impact Trends here at our Google Hangout is Shawn, who is the PhD CEA Chief Economist for the CEA, and we often talk to Shawn throughout the year to help us understand what are the great trends happening in the consumer electronics space, and specifically what are we going to be seeing on the floor. So Shawn is going to take us through the first trend, which is the meta trend of the Internet of Me. Shawn?
Thanks, Lori. So obviously there's a lot going on at CES. And many of these trends build off of years and decades of evolution. We're going to move through this continuum of innovation as we move from one year to the next. One of the things I see developing now is this trend that we're referring to as the Internet of Me. And the way to think about it is, as we start to digitize the environment around us, and we start to then add connections and add sensors, we start to be able to get a very unique read on an environment, on a person. So imagine that I'm wearing a wearables that tells you how stressed I am or how excited I am. I have a thermostat in my home that's connected that tells you how hot it is or how cold it is inside and outside. I've got cameras that tell you how many people are in the room, whether they're sitting up, whether they're lying down. We take all of these diverse data streams together, and we can start to do really robust things. So if I provided that information to somebody like, say, Netflix, they might look at that and say, okay, we see that Shawn's at home alone, he's lying down, his watch says that he's depressed, it's cold outside. Let's recommend, this Nicholas Sparks movie or some other movie that he may not normally be that interested in based upon his viewer history, but given the environment, we think this is the right fit. So we're going to continue to get more granular in our recommendations, more granular in our experiences, and we start to get a very unique individual experience with these devices. And you start to see that really spill out into a number of places. So looking at the 2015 International CES, we have companies like L'Oreal exhibiting for the first time. You take a cosmetic company very analog experience, but they recognize the role that digital is playing and that it's colliding with all of these, what used to be historically fully 100% analog experiences. And so they're starting to look at, okay, how do we engage at this level? What are the type of products that we bring to market? How do we take advantage of an environment that's increasingly and quickly becoming digitized? And how do we create a very unique individual experience? If you think about the internet experience that we had, say, circa 1995, it was all about the browser. It was the desktop browser. And if you recall, like a lot of that time frame was about trying to keep consumers on the same platform. So Yahoo acquired a bunch of different assets and tried to keep you there as long as they could. And those were the numbers that they would report in their quarterly financials and others, how long their average user was staying on the site. Then we introduced the internet to the smartphone, and our initial push was around the browser. So we tried to create browsers that were optimized for smartphone use and websites that were optimized for the smartphone use. But we realized consumers weren't interested in a traditional internet experience where they browsed content. They wanted nuggets of information delivered to them quickly and relevant to other information that was available. So you take something like Yelp. They didn't necessarily want all recommendations for restaurants in a given city. They wanted them relevant relative to where they were. Or something like Foursquare, where they wanted to be information that was relevant to their locale. And so you start to use the information that's broadly available on the internet, but to deliver a very relevant and contextually meaningful experience. As we take digitization from devices to objects, we open that up from, say, the 2 billion smartphones we have globally today to the 50 billion objects that we'll have over the coming decade. That's the storyline you'll start to see unfold at CES.
Shawn, I just wanted to ask one question before we jump to our next trend. Have you seen an increase in exhibitors and companies this year? Because now there are so many more connected devices, so it feels like there are so many more players now in the consumer electronics space because of this Internet of Me phenomenon.
You're definitely seeing a broadening of companies engage at CES. So they recognize that this is no longer a storyline that they are isolated from, but that this is a storyline that's quickly colliding with them. And you can see, early on, companies were caught off guard when digital connection, sensorization collided with them. The content community, newspapers, music, they were surprised by the quick digitization of their core space. Now companies are well aware that digitization is encroaching into every facet of our lives. And we're experimenting with it in a number of different ways. So we're looking now at, okay, the wrist. Is the wrist a good place to bring the internet? Does it make sense to have the wrist connected? Is there information that's relevant there? Are there unique attributes to the wrist? We're looking at other body parts, other environments in the car. So CS now attracts the top 10 auto manufacturers. They recognize digitization is pouring into the environment inside the car, and they're trying to create a very unique experience as well. And so they're driving an Internet of Me experience within the vehicle.
Wow. So there's really no business category right now that's not being impacted by this. And I should remind our listeners to please, on the Hangout, type in your questions. We're going to definitely want to get you involved and have a conversation here. And our other panelists are going to be jumping in throughout this as well. And I'd love to go to our next trend. And we're publishing all of these trends through our partner at Synopsys. And we'll also be distributing a white paper on these trends during the week of CES through Synopsys, so keep your eyes open for that. And I should also mention, if you are interested in taking a tour with StoryTech, please go to cesweb.org, where you can register for CES, which is, of course, the hottest show in town in January, and check out the tours and the StoryTech offering. So let's jump to our next speaker, Mark from Location X, who's going to talk about the trend of a transactional life, which is all about the world of commerce, as it's serving an example of how everything is beginning to orient around your personal ID, from beacons to payments to privacy, and what that means for the Internet of Me, for your digitally connected life. And obviously, you know, we've been hearing a lot about Apple Pay and things like that. So Mark, talk to us about what you're doing at Location X and what's going to be happening in this transactional world.
Thanks, Lori. So I appreciate that. So again, my name's Mark Kapczynski. I'm the co-founder of a company called Location X, which is in the beacon space, or a lot of people think of it or know it as the iBeacon marketplace. Location X is basically providing audience deployments and technologies centered around proximity and location data. And so what we've seen as it relates to the transactional life is really everything that we now do as consumers, every activity is some form of a transaction. That doesn't mean it's a financial transaction, but it means there's some kind of point of engagement where you're touching a computer system and the system has to respond back to you. That could be over the web, could be in the store, or through a mobile device. And at the end of the day, the consumer, as they're having all these different transactions throughout their day-to-day lives, you know, it's almost like too overwhelming. And so part of that really comes to us as product vendors and manufacturers and service providers to figure out how do we, you know, provide convenience and delight in this really complicated world to that consumer. And I think it starts really, well, you actually have to know who your consumer is at the end of the day. It starts with that notion of personalization and really understanding who your customer is, and kind of, you know, I almost think of it as the old school way of marketing to consumers was this broad reach, just like blast messages out there. Now we're very focused on, you know, the omni-channel approach and really taking that personalized approach to every single consumer, now just trying to find ways to do that at scale and really create these what I'd call connected experiences. So connecting them across locations and across devices, and having the understanding of how all those things interact with one another. And so it really does start with personalization. You have to know who the customer is, who is that person, what makes them unique, and what are their unique qualities, so that then you can understand how to best deliver either a message to them, a promotion, a product offering, a product configuration, and so on. And all that relies on the data intelligence about that. And I think a lot of people get a little frightened that, you know, where does all this data come from and what are we going to do with it, and we're going to do nefarious things with it. But I think consumers at the end of the day are truly willing to give up that notion of privacy in exchange for that convenience and notion of delight. So if I always think of it, you know, maybe I'm getting old now, but it's like, you know, the computers have to do more work. You know, the computers actually have to do the work. You know, we can't just sit there and require consumers to bang at the keyboard or on their mobile device to do everything. We have to be more intelligent than the consumer, and really anticipate their needs and wants to deliver to them, which kind of then ties into, you know, the whole shopping experience is going to change, whether it's mobile or in-store or online, has to take in all these different data elements and provide the consumer the right experience at the right time and have consistency. You know, I always think it's funny, like I go to Best Buy to buy a new device or some new game or something, and my shopping experience is disconnected to my online experience. Why aren't these things more tied together? And when I walk in the store, why doesn't the store anticipate my needs and make sure that I'm a high-value customer of theirs, meet me and greet me at the front door and walk me right into the right section where I can make my purchase? We're starting to see some of that get implemented in the e-commerce kind of world, where we're trying to transition and take all that data and improve the sort of performance or the speed to which consumers can accomplish these different tasks and transactions by, again, connected experiences with that. As you then start to progress into that, I think, and obviously I've been building a company around this related to proximity, starts to play into that importance. Where are you when you're trying to complete a transaction? And again, whether I'm just browsing or I'm actually trying to make a purchase in the moment. That involves having data about when you're inside a location or when you're outside, you know, traveling around the town. I think of it like if you're at Best Buy and I'm trying to make a purchase, wouldn't they love to know where I was before? Like maybe I was shopping for the same electronics at a different store, but now I'm over at Best Buy. So they may want to really tailor their message and really try to close the deal with me before I go to the next location. And so it's really understanding, again, the personalized experience, not just what I'm interested in, but really what's my behavior and my location and my device data all telling the either the retailer or the manufacturer or the service provider to help me. And then at the end of the day, it all gets back to convenience. I don't know about you guys, but I love using Apple Pay. I use it every time I go to the store, especially we shop at Whole Foods. It's just great. It's so easy. I don't even have to take my wallet anymore. It's just, simply I got my phone. I have to have my phone as my sort of emergency lifeline, and now I can make my purchase with it too. And we're starting to see that whole integrated experience come together in exactly what you're calling the transactional life.
Mark,
hopefully it's a few insights there.
I just want to jump in for a second. It seems to me, this Christmas they talked a lot about showrooming. The idea that a consumer would walk into a store, use their phone for price comparison, decide whether to buy it online or buy it in the store, or make their decisions based on being connected, but not necessarily connected to the store they're in. And you're saying omni-channel marketing, which would be the approach where any retailer or brand would be able to travel with the consumer more or less as a shopping buddy, as a shopping partner. I'm getting that you're saying that this is basically the response to showrooming and competing with and grabbing, by the way, what Lori refers to as online foot traffic, so that you're basically in the ecosystem of the retailer. I'm guessing that's the point that you're making.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I think to me it all goes back to the beginning, which is you got to know who your customers are, and you have to actually be willing to engage with them, and yeah, you're going to collect data on them, and you have to move from just we're going to create big television ad campaigns and blast them out there broad market to this is more focused, more targeted. It's more work for the marketer and the vendors themselves and the retailers, but at the end the payoff is so much greater because you know what? At the end of the day, like I'm talking about Best Buy. I love shopping at Best Buy now, and that's where I buy all my devices these days.
Okay, well they're not a sponsor, so don't talk to them again.
That gives us that's a great opportunity to actually introduce our next speaker and our sponsor, Supernap. Jason, SVP of Cloud at Supernap, who's going to talk to us about two different trends that are based in the cloud, touched by a sensor, and yours virtually. And Mark actually led us right nicely into this because the world that Mark is talking about, this transactional world, is really all powered by the cloud in many ways. So Jason, can you talk to us about those trends and how the cloud is really servicing this whole world?
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting if I think about it from my standpoint. I don't know can you guys hear me?
Yeah, you're great.
Yeah, so if I think about it from my standpoint and the point of reference that we come from here at Switch Supernap, it's actually kind of an interesting idea. You look at what we're doing here in Las Vegas, and we've built the world's most powerful technology ecosystem. And people go, well, what does that mean? What is that related to? How do we translate that into something that we can understand? If you think about all of these things that are happening, and you look at this Internet of Things, Internet of Me, Internet of Connected Devices out there, by 2020, we're estimating that about 50 billion devices will be connected to the Internet. Right? When you think about 50 billion devices being connected to the Internet, you run into an interesting kind of concept, because what we all know is that we interface with technology, with applications that are written for us, right? And whether that application sits on a piece of hardware or is on a device that we use, we're using that application. That application travels over the Internet, travels over a network, and it lands on servers and storage that sit somewhere. And that somewhere actually becomes a very important part of this equation. When and a lot of people talk about big data. We like to talk about little data, right? Little data, when it comes to the Internet of Things, it's going to be lots of little data, right? And location is going to be one of the most interesting elements of that. I think that's one of the things I loved about Mark was talking about, is related to the transactional life and how that's going to be. One of the most important elements of all this data is location, because what becomes meaningful in all of this isn't just that we have a little data about this and a little data about that and a little data about that, but how all the data comes together. And this data coming together is not going to occur at the end device. It's actually going to occur somewhere else, and where that occurs is in the cloud. Where it occurs is in the data centers where all of this is stored. And so our environment, we're 1.7 million square feet of data center space here in Las Vegas, and over 300 megawatts of power powering the Fortune 500 and some of the largest companies in the world, from healthcare to e-commerce to media. You know, and if you go to our website, you can look at our customers and see everyone that's part of that. And what we realize is that when you think about all of this data being generated, it actually has to go somewhere. If it doesn't go somewhere, then it is of no value. It's of no value to anyone. And the most important part of all of this, like I said, is how the data is going to interact together. And what we can't be is in a situation where all of our devices themselves have to contain all of the computing power to make sense of all of this, because you've got battery power issues. You've got, you know, if I'm wearing something on my wrist and it's trying to do a bunch of compute besides just collect data, that becomes extremely difficult for me to make that item function. And we're seeing this evolution of where now they're realizing how important the cloud is in this spectrum. That data comes back. We do the data processing in the cloud. We do the data storage in the cloud. We do the data integration in the cloud. And then the end devices can proliferate and be everything that they want it to be, so that we can take advantage of that on a regular basis. The other advantage of the cloud, and this is probably the most important, because when we look at all of these connected devices out there, and we look at how all of this is going to work, the speed to get to market is becoming extremely important. And one of the things the cloud has done for us is it's created an agile platform for us to develop and build applications in. Where before, when you ran an IT project or you ran a project and you said, we want to go do this thing, you went and talked to your technology team, and the technology team went away in a little room, and then they came back and they said, we have a plan for what we're going to do, and here's our plan. And then you said, okay, that sounds like a good plan. And then they came back 9 months later, and then they said, oh, here's our thing. And you went, well, the market's changed. I don't need that thing anymore. My requirements have changed. I thought you guys couldn't accomplish what you were doing. And then they go, and then they miss the mark, and then they start over. One of the things cloud has given us the ability to do is develop in a much more quicker cycle. And anyone who's developing applications in this space, they're building the elements that we're going to interact with. They're creating those elements. And then they're building the software in the background that's going to manage that. And today they don't have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on infrastructure to make that happen. They can leverage cloud computing to help build these applications, build these environments on a much smaller scale in the beginning. And then as they scale, they'll figure out how the costs work. But to get started, it's a very different dynamic. A great example is, you know, when Twitter first started, is they had to raise, I think, they raised a bunch of money, but about $700,000 of their initial fundraising was infrastructure to power Twitter. Today, you could start Twitter on like $4,000 a month. Wow. Right? That's the difference that we're talking about, and how the cloud has an impact on the way all of these things come together. Because we see an interesting trend. As we've talked about this, right now we've got this idea. We're in the very beginnings of all of this, everything being connected world. We're still in the very infancy of this, regardless of what people think. We're in the very beginning. And so you think about this, it starts out with this idea of networked consumer electronics, which we have. You know, the average home has like 3.5 connected devices in it. I have 4 teenage daughters. I have 37 connected devices in my home. And I'm not kidding. That's the actual number, right? And the most important one is my Sony PS4. So that gets priority over everything. But now the second wave of this, so that's the network consumer electronics, and that's what we'll see. I think, you know, to what we spoke in the beginning, that's what we're going to see at CES. A lot of these networked consumer electronics. The next wave is where industries are going to start to network, where it's logistics, it's energy, it's video and media, it's multimedia, it's the media experience, it's the automotive industry, it's healthcare. Right now you're going to see industries develop ecosystems around this related data and what it means to us. The Netflix example was a great one, right? I'm sitting at home, I'm depressed, it's not a movie I'd normally watch, and then they go, boom, you should watch The Wizard of Oz. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh wow, I feel happy, right? Now my watch tells me I'm happy, right? You're going to see these industries. And then after the evolution of the networked industry, we're going to start to see the network society, right? That's where, and that's kind of the panacea. It's way out there still. And at each step, we're going to see an improved reach, an improved value, we're going to see improved process efficiency, and then we're going to see improved technology efficiency as we kind of migrate through this whole path and go through this whole journey of how all this comes together. But at the end of the day, all of this stuff is coming back to a location, and it has to be connected to it has to all be connected. If it's not connected, it has very little meaning for everyone. And that connectivity is critical, and the aggregation and the centralization of that data is critical. That's why we as Supernap have done what we've done, and we're seeing our customers kind of take advantage of this. What we've noticed, and what I continue to talk to people about, is that technology is no longer an industry. It is the fabric of every business. At the core of every business is technology at some level. It's like payroll, right? You can't get away from it. You got to pay people to do what they're going to do. Technology is now air, it's water. It is becoming a piece of everything that we do. And the most important element of this is not to be waiting too long to embrace it. If you wait too long to embrace it, you will miss out on a revolution that's occurring. It will be no different than missing out on the Industrial Revolution, right? And we all know what happens in companies and people and countries that missed out on that revolution. And so what we've been able to do is build a great environment for all that to come back to and to continue to grow.
Jason, I'm just going to jump in here real quick with a quick question before we move on. You know, as you speak, it just seems there's going to be this explosion, exponential explosion of data, and that everything will run on data. And you talked about square footage and space. If it's expanding exponentially, how will society cope with the amount of data that is generated? Like, there's tons of bits and bytes being created right now in this conversation. So all the interactions, how will storage expand? How does the data industry support that? Because as you said, none of these things can run without data.
Well, it's a great question, and we see two trends going on that are going to work together. One, companies like us who understand the scale of where it's going, but two, the hardware manufacturers are actually continuing to compress technology. The only reason we're able to do what we're talking about now is because the cost of technology, the cost of storage, the cost of compute continues to go down. There's an interesting, when the Industrial Revolution occurred, there was an economist, his name was Javin, and he came up with Javin's paradox, and it's an interesting dynamic. He basically surmised and he observed that the more we use of something, or the more efficient we become with something, the more we use of it. And he saw that with coal. Like, we got more efficient with the use of coal, and technically we should have used less coal. But we as humans are very good at going, whatever you give me, I will max it out. And that's what's happening with technology right now. We're getting more efficient with storage, we're getting more efficient with compute, and rather than it shrinking, we're actually doing more. We're just doing more with less, and then that more with less turns into more and more and more and more. Now, one of the elements of this that's becoming critical that more and more people are talking about is this idea of, do I have data that I need to throw away? Right? If I'm gathering all this data, is there data I got to cast out and get rid of? Like in this conversation, Jason's my comments, the system's going, those are worthless, we're going to cast those out, right? When you think about how all this stuff is coming together, but what they're realizing is that sometimes the data that we weren't thinking about in the future is becoming the most valuable piece. And so these elements of like archival and immediate storage and all of these things, the things I don't know to ask, that's the most valuable down the road. The things I don't assume I know are becoming the most valuable. And so it isn't stopping. It's going to continue to grow. But we see two things. Places like us being able to handle the capacity, and two, technology shrinking in order to enable that to happen.
That's great. Jason, thank you so much. That was so insightful and great for setting the stage for what's really happening here. And to wrap up one of our last trends, I wanted to bring in Andreas from Pixability. He's the CTO over there to talk about the trend of content getting down to business, which is all about what's happening with the massive cord cutting. So talking about data and things getting smaller and more choices and everybody jumping in, what's going on with content and entertainment and consumer behavior right now, Andreas?
Right. I think the huge trend that we are seeing and that drives our business and many of our customers' business is really this incredible increase in options for how people can consume video content. So we are already all used to a multi-screen world. People have started to watch less and less traditional TV. They watch video content on their laptops, on their smartphones, tablets, and so on, and more different devices. And underlying this trend is also a huge proliferation in content distribution platforms. You have less and less control, basically, that we are seeing by traditional media companies and more by alternative players, aggregators like Hulu, platforms like Netflix, and also especially where we are focusing on as a company at Pixability, the YouTube platform, which is really pretty much the only game in town currently for short-form content, anything that is shorter than your traditional TV series, and also user-generated content and brand-oriented content. So this whole fragmentation initially sounds a bit scary. There's all these many options now that are coming out, but it opens up a lot of new opportunities for brands and for individual users to get out and find the right audience. So what we do at Pixability is we work with large brands and help them run very effective ad campaigns on the YouTube platform. We help them shape the entire ecosystem and user experience on YouTube, content strategy, search engine optimization, channel management, and so on, when they bring out their own brand-oriented content to reach their audience directly. And Shawn, to give you an example, Shawn earlier mentioned L'Oreal exhibiting for the first time this year at CES. That's also one of our clients, and we help them with a project called Destination Beauty, where they work with independent content creators, video bloggers on YouTube who produce makeup tutorials for L'Oreal. So they basically collaborate with them. They produce these very nice tutorials, several minutes long, where they explain in detail how to achieve a particular look. And the crazy thing is that these video bloggers are actually not required to only work with L'Oreal products. They are allowed to talk about competitive products, because that's just how a platform like YouTube works. It's all about the authenticity, about the individual voice of content creators. And brands have to adapt to this new world. They have to give up a little bit of control to get more exposure to their target audience, and all these different platforms that we are now seeing in online video really drive this trend forward. It's a very different environment for brand advertisers, both a bit more scary, maybe a bit more complex, but also definitely very satisfying and very fresh in the ways that you can reach your target audience.
And do you think all the things that everybody was talking about, all these devices, all the location-based services, and now all the proliferation of screens powered by the cloud, are content creators going to be more in demand than ever before, because all of these things need content to engage all of us with, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, there are basically two somewhat contradictory trends. On one hand, there is a lot more demand for content. On the other hand, there's so much content out there that it's almost impossible to even watch just a tiny slice of what might be potentially interesting to you. For instance, right now, about 300 hours of new content is uploaded to YouTube every hour, and nobody obviously can ever watch all of this stuff. But it's a huge opportunity for people who are really on top of things and produce really valuable content. Since we're talking about consumer electronics here, an interesting example is a guy called Marcus Brownlee on YouTube. He's a 21-year-old guy producing gadget reviews out of his dorm room, and he has over 2 million subscribers. He has a larger audience than most cable TV networks who listen to him talk about the latest gadgets. And if you don't interact as a brand with somebody like that, you're simply losing out. So the trick is really finding out who you should be really talking to. That's one of the things that we do at Pixability, and then really develop a strategy for how you interact with your audience through these multipliers, through these influencers.
Oh, thank you, Andreas. So it's really an exploding world as well. So I wanted to throw a question out to everybody, and I'm hearing from some folks that they can't log in questions right now, but I have a few coming from another chat window from some friends. So everybody wants to know, what are all of you, just jump in as we wrap this up, what are some of the tech that you are the most excited about that you're going to be seeing on the Consumer Electronics Show as it relates to these trends that we've been talking about? And just any of you jump in. Love to hear your thoughts on what you're the most excited about.
So, I think what I'm most interested in is the conversation that's going to take place around some of these devices. For the last decade, I would say, a lot of what we saw at CES was the application of these trends, digitization, connection, sensorization, to devices, showing that it was technologically possible. And I think we're moving beyond that point now. So no longer is it enough to show that it's technologically possible. We now want to see that it's commercially viable, that it's got a meaningful use case scenario. And so we're looking at, just because it can be digitized doesn't mean it should be digitized. What does the user experience? What does the use case scenario look like? What does the service component look like? What's the interface, and how does that engage with the consumer? So I think there's a lot of nuance that's going to come over the next, certainly in 2015, but over the next decade, beyond just showing that things are technologically possible, showing that they're meaningful.
So
I would.
Go ahead, Jason. I'll go next.
I would echo that. I think where this is all going, I think the next evolution in this is to go from, is to see technology that goes from, that was interesting, right? I think about that, like some of the health bands. Like there's a lot of Fitbits and all those kind of things. Like, okay, I took 8,000 steps today. Right? Over time, what does that mean? And how does that value? What value do I get out of that? And so the focus now more is on long-term use cases, I think. And I think to the point we made, technology has proven it's possible. Now we have to prove it's relevant, and then we have to prove it has an extended use case, not just a short window of gee whiz interesting stuff.
Mark?
I was actually going to first say smartwatches, but I don't know if that's exciting enough. No, but I mean, definitely building on what everyone said so far, I definitely think it's less about one particular product, and it's more about that infrastructure and the platforms that all these, you can make the assumption that everything is internet connected now, and so what are you going to do with that data? What are you going to do with that information? How do you make my experience with whatever device or media or content or whatever the application is, how do you make my life better? So, sort of, how are you going to wow me? So that's what I'm most looking for, is like, what are the devices and the products actually going to do with the data and service to benefit me?
Right.
So
Brian,
I'm just going to be a geek fanboy, Lori.
Yeah, please do. And I think also I'd love for you to talk a little bit about our millennial trend as well, which we didn't really get to talk about.
Okay, well, I can talk about that very quickly, but what I do, and maybe Shawn will be thrilled to hear this, is I run right over to the Innovation Award winners because the geek in me wants to, one, see what's happening, and it's like when I was a kid, it was like seeing concept cars, but these things are actually becoming real. So in my head, I like to place down bets on the winners that I think will live and last. And one has grabbed me, which is the ring from a company in Japan. I think it's called Logbar. And it's a ring that you place on your finger, and it's navigation, it's gestures, all coming from the ring. So I'm like excited for that. So that's what I do. I run over to the Innovation Awards because, we're used to touring the floor. We put our tours in the context of storytelling, and we see all the technology that can enable storytelling. And then when there's breaks, I sneak over to look at the Innovation Award winners in the case because that excites me.
There's no breaks.
Yeah, there is when you collapse. So millennials, there's not a trend that we haven't discussed today that isn't influenced by, and some even born by, millennial lifestyles. The best thing I can say is if you run to Wikipedia and you look up Strauss, S-T-R-A-U-S-S, Howe, H-O-W-E, generational theory, and you look at those things that are written under the millennial generation, they're a civic generation, they're about cooperation. That's a real education. But millennials are digital natives, everybody knows that. They have a lifestyle. And in many cases, the disruption that has happened, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Kickstarter, whether it's Twitter, these are millennial-founded companies that are starting to shape the future. And so when you look at millennials and technology, they get it quicker, they can multitask. As a baby boomer, I could look at a millennial and say, my God, they have attention deficit disorder. But the truth is they're expert multitaskers. And I believe they're wired completely differently because when we grew up, we never did things that involved two hands except play the piano, let alone 2 feet for Dance Dance Revolution. So I think neural pathways are different, and I think that watching millennials and observing how they behave is so that their lifestyle, so the technology is integrated into the lifestyle and born of the lifestyle rather than imposed on the lifestyle, is a completely different way that technology integrates into people's lives, and I think it's really exciting. And the last thing I want to say is, every generation has a thought about the generation that comes after them, and it usually comes through their frame of reference. So for those of us that think millennials are entitled or coddled or whatever those words are that baby boomers and Gen Xers are using for millennials, we're wrong, because they are changing the shape of the world. In numbers, they are the largest generation yet, and they are changing how we are, and it's a global generation. It just isn't centered in North America. And so I think it's really important to watch how they behave with technology, and that's the sea change underneath all of these other trends.
That's fantastic. I wanted to throw out one question by one of the folks that's watching the show to wrap up our Hangout today. And our colleague Mark Johnson, who's out in Los Angeles at DirecTV, wanted to know what are the the social impact of all these data and devices. Obviously there's going to be a trade-off between data and giving me something back, but what are the social implications? Do you think people are going to be having a lot of privacy issues because of that? Are we going to have identity issues? Does privacy disappear? It's a big topic, but just what do we all think to wrap this all up about the social implications?
So, Lori, let me jump in. One of the things I've been thinking about lately is, how smoking was like this very common social experience for really probably decades, right? And then we move into this period where like it becomes this faux pas, and I feel like sitting is the new smoking. Like we wear fitness bands that track how many steps we walk, and we talk about it, and we have all these other objects that are now connected to teach us not to sit so much. And so we're like changing the social dynamics around the behaviors that we engage in, and I think you're going to see more things like that. So you see something like Jawbone Up, which is a fitness tracker, ties into Uber. And so it's measuring the number of steps you didn't take when you took that Uber a mile and a half. So, we think about measuring data as only I guess, maybe the positive, measuring the positive data, but I think there's also measuring the null data. Like, what would that data have, and estimating what I call the null data. Like, what would that data have looked like had it happened? And it didn't happen, so do we care about that? A tangible example is the number of steps you didn't take, but it could be any number of different things.
Well, I'm going to jump in here, and maybe Jason will follow me. I think there are going to be data wars. I really think there's going to be arguments over the ownership of data. Who owns it? Whether you create it, do you own it? Do companies own it? Do storytellers own it because they prompt interactions? And then just riffing off of Shawn, Google Ingress, as Lori knows, is the largest multiplayer, real-time, out-in-the-world game that millions of people are playing all over the world, enabled by your Android devices, that is based on Google Earth and Google data collected, and the people are adding to that database. But they're learning about the environment, they're getting married because they're meeting people while they're playing this game, and they're making differences in their communities. So I guess data is like nuclear power, for good or for evil.
Well, let me jump in real quick, because so as part of what I'm doing with my business, it's all about data collection and being a data aggregator, and from previous jobs working for one of the largest data aggregators. I actually take maybe the simpleton kind of approach, which is, as long as you're transparent with data to the consumer and they know where you're collecting the data from and what you're using it for and who's getting it, they actually really don't have a problem. Just give them a delete button, so if they actually want to ever push it, they can. We in my previous career with a data aggregator, we had all these things, and the reality is no one ever pushes the delete button. And so I think you can actually just take a more simplistic approach. At least that's my philosophy. Just keep it really simple. Just let people know what you're doing, where you're collecting it from, and where it's going. And of course, I guess eliminate the perception of nefarious activity.
Anybody else want to jump in before we wrap it up?
Yeah, maybe from a content and marketing perspective, we know more and more about smaller and smaller slices of audience. So what we see is really a fragmentation of audiences across many different subtopics. When you spend a lot of time on YouTube, you actually even every week learn about a whole new subculture or huge stars that you have never heard of. It's really amazing how many different niches are out there. And that's a bit of a problem for just on a society level for really having a unique experience across many different people. And I think this fragmentation has definitely its dangers, but it's also a huge opportunity because people can get so much more in touch with what they're really interested in. So as all technology, positive and negative sides.
That's a great point to wrap it up. Anybody want to add anything else before we close out?
I was just going to add that I think we hit on some of the social implications that are around data privacy and other types of things. What I've been interested in is watching my teenage daughters, right, who are really right in the middle of this generation, and how technology is changing their desire to actually gather together. And when we talk about millennials, they talk about wanting to live in these coordinated, these urban style environments where they're shopping in their home and everything is within walking distance, right? They have that desire because they still desire to have that physical connection. So even though we're becoming this connected world, and you talk about these games that are being played where people are meeting, there's still a desire to gather together. They're even learning that online learning by itself is not sufficient for education, right? You're looking at online learning programs now that say, yes, we have online learning, but you're required to gather together as a group twice a week in order to get a grade in a class. And you talk to the students that are in those experiences, and they say, if I wasn't getting together, this class would be of no value. And so I think what it's doing is it's changing the reason why we gather together, and it's actually a more motivating force that we're gathering with more people that we're interested in. There's nothing worse than going to the beach with 1 million of your least favorite friends. But now, with social networking and digital stuff, we can now go, hey, I'm going to go to the beach with the 5 or 10 people that I love spending time with the most because they're easy to reach and they're easy to contact. And so I think what this is doing is it's changing the social dynamic, but it hasn't eliminated it because there's still a desire for people to get together and look each other in the eye or look at each other through their phones while they're together or whatever it is, right? There's still a desire to get together, and I think even though we're doing this network, the end game of all of this is a networked, more efficient society. That's way down the road, and we will see a more efficient human race when we get there.
Wow.
But this party is going to have a lot of different pieces.
That is a very hopeful way to wrap up this conversation. I really like that, and great to kick off the holiday season as well. So let me
Oops.
check out YouTube world and programmatic for YouTube as well. So really exciting company, and the work that they're doing there in content is fantastic. We have Mark from Location X, who's really diving into operationalizing the future of proximity. So look out for more information from Mark. We of course have Jason from Supernap, and just to reiterate, Jason is our platinum sponsor for both this Hangout and for our tours at CES. And the Supernap is again the highest rated co-location data center in the world. So check out supernap.com, and you can see it in Las Vegas as well. If you're there for CES, register for CES at cesweb.com, and please come and join us on the StoryTech Impact Tours, where we'll take you around the floor and we'll give you that relevancy for the technology that you're seeing and why it's going to impact your business. Look out for all of these trends and more details on them in Synopsis. And finally, let's thank our co-sponsor and host, CEA, and Shawn, for being there for us and for guiding us all year round on the latest trends in the consumer electronics world. Thank you so much, Shawn. Thank you, CEA, and thank you, everybody, for joining us. And this will be hosted on CEA's Google page, so please send it out to your friends. And thanks again. Have a great holiday season. Bye, everybody.